And this presentation is kind of near and dear to my heart because one of the things, as I'm talking to people, I mentioned earlier when some of you were on, I was talking to my son's engineering class, Burlingame High School, two different classes. And one of the questions was, you know, what is Agile about, obviously, and these are high school students, and most of them never heard of it before. And I was explaining to them, I think really what it amounts to is it amounts to making, you know, seeing the world differently, but also making better decisions. And so one of the things about making better decisions is something that, if you remember Russ Ackoff, when we were watching the video during the class, some of you, he talks about the fact that there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. I don't think that's the exact words, but you get the idea. You know, intelligence is knowing something, but wisdom is actually knowing when and how to apply it. If I could, you know, give anybody anything, you know, I hope that from time to time, I help dispense some wisdom, that I'm giving you different ways of seeing the world in my perspective so that you will be able to make better decisions in the moment. And so wisdom and the concept of wisdom is really important. I remember right before I get started, I remember another time I was in Hyderabad giving training. I was there for about 2 weeks. And I remember they had a little going away lunch or dinner or something. And one of the gentlemen said to me, he says, "Larry, I understand what you're trying to do now. You're trying to give us some wisdom." So I think hopefully I've been around this earth long enough that I can actually give folks some wisdom, and this is what this is about. I call it things I tell my sons. And it's not, you know, it's when I can actually get them to listen to me, I should put in parentheses. So, because people ask me, do you tell your sons all these things? I say, well, if I had the time, I would tell them if they would listen. They don't always listen, but they're busy with their own lives. So things I tell my sons, if you look here, these are my three boys. And obviously we were having the discussion before of it could be things I tell my daughters. I just happen to have sons. And if you look, these three boys, the youngest one is my pride and joy. And this picture was taken some time ago. He is now taller than both the other boys. That my youngest is Darian. The one who is choking him is Vadik or Vadim, and the oldest brother is on the right. That's Igor. I'm very fortunate that all my children live with me in this wonderful house we have here, and so. I want to talk about some of the things I tell my sons, because what I found is the things that I tell my sons are some of the things that I tell my Scrum teams from time to time. And there was a lot of intersection, because I think, you know, I've talked about a Scrum Master being kind of a servant leader in the sense that you want your teams and your people to do well, right? You want them to be engaged in your work. You want them to have a good life, so to speak, just like we do for our children. So I found that there's a big intersection between what I was telling my sons, or things I would hope to tell my sons, and things that I sometimes tell my Scrum teams. The first thing for those, and I think I explained a little bit better, I didn't have the luxury of being a father until much later in life, which was a good thing. I didn't have the energy really that I needed to be chasing little ones around, but I had a certain amount, I would say, of maybe maturity, patience, and compassion that I probably didn't have when I was younger. I was a Scrum Master before I was a father. I had done this Agile thing before, you know, started this Agile journey before I started becoming a father. And what I realized is when I became a father, I probably mentioned this in class, I think I became a better Scrum Master, because I started to understand what was meant by the term servant leadership. And this is not that if you don't have kids that you're not going to understand servant leadership, but if you do have kids, it's going to be much easier to access. Because servant leadership is about putting those people that you serve, that you lead, first and foremost. And doing things to make sure that they're successful, which is different than what we normally view as leadership or at least what we see in popular TV and movies and things about leadership, which is more of a caricature of leadership. True leaders make sure that they take care of the people. And you can see that if you understand true leadership about being a servant. So you're more concerned with your kids being successful than with you being successful. Your success is their success. And you would do things that you might not do, necessarily for yourself, but you do it for them. And that's really, really important. So this was a lesson that I learned. And this is why this presentation, I believe, is appropriate for people who are Agile coaches and Scrum Masters. The thing I tell my kids a lot, and I tell my team sometimes, is you can be right or you can be effective, but you can't always be both. Choose one. We have a lot of confirmation bias. We've talked about that in class. We, as human beings, want to be right. But there's a difference between being right and getting the job done. Being right feels good for us. And that simplistic thing of when we're right, we get that kind of dopamine hit, or we get some kind of neurotransmitter rush. We feel good when we're right. But that's a very selfish thing. And we have to decide, do we wish to be right or do we wish to be effective? And they're not always the same thing. And this is a very important thing for people to understand, because we have this need. It's almost like oxygen or food. We have this need to be right, but being right doesn't always get the job done. So we have to choose sometimes between the two. And I don't care, honestly, when I talk to my sons or I talk to my teams, I don't care which one it is. Choose one, though, if you're going to have to make that choice, and understand that you are making a choice, that you have a choice whether you're going to do the right thing or you're going to be right, because they won't always be the same, right? Here's another one, and this is very, very important for younger people to understand, and sometimes older people too, but it's not meant to be easy. It's meant to be worth it. What does that mean? It means that we as human beings, and science tells us this, sociology, psychology tells us, we're not very good at understanding what will make us happy. We think it's ease, right? We raise our families, and we all do this. I do it as well, so that it's easier for our children than it was for us. But we don't realize that what made us good was sometimes the struggle itself. If it's easy, it's not always going to be worth it. You're not always going to end up being a good person when it's too easy. And we see this time and time again. When you have parents who, through hard work and effort and luck, because there's always a bunch of luck involved, who climb up, think about people who are very successful. A lot of the times their children are complete dumpster fires because they just overindulge them. They don't realize that what made them good was the struggle. So we can't always want to make the road easy. When we talk about teams, Richard Hackman, I think is the one from Harvard who wrote a book on teams. He's a sociologist. I'm sure somebody in chat will correct me if I got the wrong name, but he talked about the fact that we shouldn't look for zero conflict in teams, that conflict itself and struggle itself is healthy. When we have zero conflict, it's a bad sign. We tend to want things to be easy. When you look at video games, a perfect example. Video games are highly addictive. If anybody, I don't know if I got any gamers out there, right? I don't do it that much because I will lose hours to games, as our kids do. The best video games are not the easiest ones. And they're also, and they've done studies on this, not the hardest ones. They're somewhere in the middle. They are hard enough to challenge us, but easy enough for us to rise to that challenge. And that's the world that we should build for our teams, and that's the world that we should build for our Scrum Masters, because that is what will keep them engaged. And that struggle to achieve will give them pride when they get to the other end. If you look at it, sports teams, winning the Super Bowl would be the ultimate for me. That one's passed me by. But the struggle, if anybody's played football, as I have, that you go through in order to achieve that, makes it worth more. And if it was easy, it just wouldn't matter. It's kind of like LeBron James playing against, a high school team or something. It's just not even going to be fun. I'm going to talk a lot about money with my kids, because again, as human beings, we have this tendency, especially maybe in the United States more than other countries, to equate wealth with success. And that's a bad thing, because wealth is not success. A lot of wealth is luck. It's not necessarily talent and hard work, because there's a bunch of talented, hardworking people out there who never make it. And there's many more talented and hardworking people who never make it than there are talented and hardworking people who make it. And we know that there's a bunch of untalented people who make it no matter what, right? So let's not worry about wealth, and let's not concentrate on money. Let's concentrate on wealth being not money, but being satisfied with your life. So a man or a person is not wealthy for how much that person has, but for how little they need. In Buddhism, they talk about this concept of hungry ghosts, people who get everything but still want more and can never be satisfied. We need to learn we can't always control how much money we make and how much fame or success or other things that we consider to be the outward trappings of success. We can't control those things. But there is one thing we can control, and we can control how much we want. If you look at the polling that they do, the surveys they do on the countries that are the happiest, and it's usually Denmark, shows up towards the top. And when they talk to the people about, in Denmark, why it's important, it's because they have what they need and they don't want a whole lot more, right? And I know this goes against a lot of the rules of capitalism, but this is true. And I think what we're looking for as human beings, all of us are looking for, is we're looking for happiness, or more importantly, maybe contentedness. You're not going to find it by always striving for something. Striving for something is the opposite of contentedness. It doesn't mean that you don't try. It doesn't mean that you don't set challenges. It means that regardless of what happens, you're grounded enough that you know what you have is enough. And you're not unhappy because you don't have what someone else has. None of this stuff is groundbreaking stuff, by the way, guys. You're not going to hear anything that you probably haven't heard before. It's not what happens to us. This is another thing that I tell my kids. It's not what happens to us that matters, because we don't always have control over what happens to us. What we do have control over is how we react. And this goes into, as I said before, how we view the world, right? The mental models we bring to the world, the way that we view the world becomes our reality. So we need to take control of our reaction to events, as opposed to feeling that we are powerless. Because in many cases we are. We're powerless on what will happen to us, but we are not powerless on how we react to that. I think the best example, and I think this came from, I gave this talk maybe a year or two ago, Viktor Frankl wrote a book called I think it's called Man's Search for Meaning. Something like that. Anyway, he had everything taken away from him. He was in a concentration camp. And he wrote this wonderful book about the fact that he was able to find some solace even in these terrible conditions. And I believe that was the start of existentialism, or at least one of the drivers of existentialism, but I could be wrong with that. And I'm sure that people in chat will correct me. That's the beauty of chat. The first step in changing the world is to change the way you view the world. I always talk about there's a couple steps. If you want to really make meaningful change in the world, the very first thing you need to do if you're going to make meaningful change in the world is you have to be able to see or imagine a better world, a world that is different. And then you take that vision and somehow get others to see it. I think that's how true change starts. When we talk about agile transformation, as I've done this for some years, trying to help change organizations. One, most organizations don't want to change. Two is you cannot forcefully, I don't believe, change anybody. I'm not going to change your opinion by pushing you. I'm not going to change your opinion by telling you you're wrong and throwing facts at you as if they were some kind of arrows, right? Which goes back to you can be right or you can be effective. I'm right, I have the facts, but am I actually seeing a change in the world by being right? No, I don't see a change in the world by being right. I have to take then my vision and I have to be able to take it and give it to you. Give you these different lenses and different ways of looking at the world. And then when you see the world differently, you will hopefully start to behave differently and we will create change in the world. We won't create change in the world just by being right. We have to imagine a different world and it starts with us. This one's a little bit funny, but you know that usually teenagers, they get zits on their face and it's a tragedy for some of them. I can't go to school today. My kids weren't that way, but I'm sure that maybe some of you had kids or have kids that will be that way. The biggest zit in the world is the one that's on your face. Because here's a really hard, honest, what I consider to be a truth. And I think that science will bear me out. No one cares about you. They really don't. For the most part, I mean, maybe friends and family, and that's why you want to keep them close and obviously, but you know, the average Joe out there on the street doesn't care about you. They can't. They're incapable of doing it, not because they're bad people, but because they've got their own zits. They've got their own problems. We all live in like a movie. Have you ever thought that about your life? It's like a movie. And you're playing the starring role, guys. Everybody else is bit players. And because we're all playing the starring role in our own movies, we just don't have the time to pay attention to the zit on your face. We're too busy worrying about our own. So go out and do things and don't worry so much about what other people are going to think or about who you are and what you do, because they're not going to give much thought to it. That's just the way the world works. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're not capable of it. And we shouldn't be sad that we're not capable as human beings of being something that we're not. This is my I call this the Dr. Phil question. How's that working for you? When somebody comes up to you and they, you know, as they want to do sometimes, and kids every once in a while, though they don't do it that often, they ask you for advice. You ask them, hey, what are you doing? And they'll tell you, I blah, 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 blah. And then the first thing I'll say is, how's it working for you? Is it working out for you? Right? Because we tend to, as human beings, we do the same things over and over and over again. And that's, you know, that's quite, I think the definition of an insanity, I think it was in a Star Trek episode actually, is or somebody accredits to Einstein or something, but definition of an insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. What are you doing today? When I'm working with a team, what are you doing today? How's it working for you? Is it working out? Right? If it's not working, maybe you should do something else. Maybe you should try something else. Because, you know, there's no guarantee that everything's going to work. Just because you want it to work, just because you think it will work, doesn't mean that the world doesn't care. Right? The world doesn't care. There is no inherent meaning in the world itself. It's just there. We give it meaning. So how's it working for you? If it's not working, try something else. This could be a person, again, where I put in man. I have 3 sons, so I want them to grow up to be what I would consider men, solid citizens, right? But it could be people too, just so people don't get angry with me here. A man accepts responsibility, apologizes, and then fixes it. I think this is a very big thing about being mature. So we could say a mature person if we want to. We have this thing that we call ego, and we all have it, and we all want to be right, and we all want to make sure that everybody knows that we're right. But there'll be times when we're not. There'll be times when we hurt people. There'll be times when we make mistakes. That is the nature of being human. If you make a mistake and you're not a mature, if you're a kid, right? If you're a child, you're going to cover it up. You're going to give excuses. You're going to do all kinds of things to avoid the responsibility. And so many American, humans, right? Grown people, adults, so to speak, do this. Take the responsibility, accept it, right? Apologize. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And then fix it and then move on if you can fix it. And that's what it means to be an adult. We have people, I don't want to get too political, but it's hard to avoid in the world that we live in today. We have people in positions of power who can't do this. We have elected people who are not mature adults. We should stop doing that, by the way. It's not a good way to run a country. This is for my sons, my youngest. You saw Darian, who's now about this much shorter than me. I'm not a small person. He's over 6 foot tall. He's 14 years old. Pretty amazing, actually. I hope he keeps growing, because it's good to be tall in the world, actually. But he plays basketball, so this is one of the things that I hope someday he's going to be this wonderful basketball player, and maybe he'll pay for college. That would be nice. You get better by playing people better than you. This goes again back to our ego. We want to be the best, so sometimes we just don't challenge ourselves. Sometimes when we play the game, we only choose those things we know we can win. We don't play against the best competition. We don't play in the top arenas. We would rather be the big fish in the small pond. But that's not how you get better. You cannot get better by only doing those things that you're good at. You can only get better by doing those things that you're not good at, by playing competition that is better than you, by taking challenges that you might not necessarily succeed at. Everybody always says, reach for the stars, because you might miss them and still, be at the mountaintop or whatever. I don't know what, I forget, but you get the idea. Don't be afraid. It's not failure. When you go into the weight room and lift weights, it's the resistance, right, of the weight that causes the muscle. The more resistant, the more muscle. Right? Obviously, don't take on something that's too heavy. That's a perfect metaphor. You just don't lift the weights that you can lift. You always try to lift a little bit more than you can lift. And this is not about ambition per se, but this is about personal growth. So the thing that goes along with this in the mental world is you have to, I think, and I've said this many, many times, you have to cultivate intellectual humility. Because when we say it's only through weakness that we're going to find the strength, and it's only by admitting even intellectually that we have weakness or we might be wrong, that we will search for the truth and we will try to get better. And it's the same with organizations and organizational change. Sometimes I refer to it as kind of like the 12-step program of organizational changes. First, you got to admit that, look, we're not the best. We can be better. And as individuals, we need to as well. And we need to go out there and try to play the top competition. The other thing I talked to, again, this gets back to something that I mentioned before. The true measure of a person, an adult, a man, is not how he reacts when things are good. It is, anybody can be fine when the world is good, right? Look at this terrible thing we've got in the world today, this pandemic. I mean, it shows you in some respects the true nature of individuals, because it's not when things are good that we see people's true nature, because they're not tested. It's only when we're tested that you see what somebody is truly made of. So again, I don't, as I tell my kids, you don't avoid the hard things. And when the hard things happen to you and you don't have control over it, this is your test. This is your chance to prove your maturity. This is your chance to prove your humanity. So don't always avoid the tough things, and don't always cry when things don't go your way. When the pandemic hits, can you shelter in place for 8 months, or do you go out without a mask and breathe on people and get them infected? Potentially, possibly killing people. That is a sign of maturity. And again, in this country, we have a lot of folks who are adults in body, but certainly not in mind. Get off on that tangent. You want to be successful, here's a simple key to success. It's getting up one more time than you get knocked down, right? It's almost like the just do it thing from Nike. You get knocked down, get back up. So what? Happens to everyone. We all get knocked down. The question is not whether we get knocked down or how many times we get knocked down. The question is, do we get up? Metaphorically, there are a good number of people who are on this Zoom call. We're struggling with the pandemic. Some of you are struggling to find work. The key is that you don't stay on the mat, that you get back up and fight, because there are people out there getting jobs, because it's that one more resume. It's that one more LinkedIn message to try to reach out and do networking. It's that one more meetup that you do that's going to do it, right? Because where do you find, if you lose something, where do you find it? It's always the last place you look, right? And that job that you get, it's always going to be that last resume that you send out, or that last interview that you take, or that last network that you do. So don't, lay on the mat. Get back up, and you just got to get up one more time. Then you've been knocked down. And I hope you all appreciate that, because, there are people getting jobs. I get news from people getting jobs all the time. I got an email this morning. Somebody got a job I wasn't aware of. I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to embarrass her. A lot of the same thing here. My job is not to save you from the little mistakes. My job is to help you avoid the mistakes that will cost you the most time to recover from. This is very simple. When I'm talking to my boys, I think this is the same with development teams, but it's a little bit, it's slightly different, obviously. But when I'm talking to my boys, look, if you're a young man and you get your girlfriend pregnant, it's going to cost you money and 18 years of your life or more, right? If you go out and you drunk drive and you run over somebody, it could cost you 25 years. Every mistake that you make in life is going to cost you. I think everything's about time. It's the only thing we can't make more of, right? No matter what time you have, that's the time you're going to have on this earth. So you're not going to make more. So the mistakes that you make are going to cost you that time. Some of it, the little mistakes, I'm not saying I want you to make them, but I'm not going to stop you from making them, because you're going to learn from them. And you're going to learn that these things cost you time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, look, here's the big mistakes you can make. And this is the amount of time it's going to cost you. I mean, in some cases, it'll cost you the end of time, right? It'll cost you your life. I want to avoid those things. I don't want to avoid necessarily the little mistakes. So this whole thing that we see, this phenomenon called helicopter parenting, I don't think is good for our children. To keep them from avoiding all the small mistakes, they'll end up making bigger mistakes because they'll think that they're always going to be protected, and they won't be. Someday they're going to be on their own. And that's a sad, sad thought, because we do want to protect them from everything, but we can't, and we shouldn't, because it's not going to allow them to grow. I remember one of my son's high school graduations, they tell a story about a young girl. I think it's a metaphor. I don't think it's a true story. Found a, what do you call it, the butterfly in a cocoon. And as the butterfly was struggling to get out of the cocoon, she felt bad for it. So she took the scissors and she cut open the cocoon. And what happened is the butterfly came out and its wings were all misshapen and it couldn't fly, because it's the struggle of coming out of the cocoon that pushes blood into the wings and allows the wings themselves to expand and be functional. So by, stopping the little mistakes, sometimes we're going to give them bigger mistakes in life. And I noticed this when I was way back in high school. That we had, it was happened to be the person, I think it was salutatorian of our class. She was so sheltered. When she went to college, she just went nuts and made a lot of big mistakes because she was not allowed to make the little ones. And she just didn't know. And it's a tragedy. But it's all about time. You always come back. It'll take you time. You make a bad decision, right? You accept the responsibility, you fix it, and you move on. But fixing it's going to take time. If you want to know what will happen, there's an easy way to find out. Just do it. This is the Nike one again. Just do it. Don't wring your hands so much on all the things you could or could not do, right? Let's just concentrate on, look, there's something that I want to find out. Go find out. Right? Obviously within reason. I tell this to the teams a lot, right? Will pair programming work? I don't know, try it, right? Find out. That's the easiest way to find out, is try it. Feel free to experiment, but obviously experiment in a safe setting, but experiment. That's a good thing about life. As I alluded to before, time's the only thing you can't make more of. This to me is really, really important for people to understand. You can make more money. You can work, there's people out there. You could get a second job. You could work more. There's always a way to find a way to make more money, even if it's illegal. You're never going to make more time. So if you're going to look at your budget, right? I think we should spend a little bit more time worrying about our time budget than our money budget. What are we investing our time in? Because I feel bad for Americans. I know we need downtime and things, but I think sometimes we spend way too much investment of our time in things that really don't matter. And we need to pay more attention to it. I'd rather be stingy with my time than with my money. And maybe that's just a luxury that I have because I happen to be very fortunate. But I would much rather spend money to gain time. And the older we get, I think the more we realize that. That's why we always say youth is wasted on the young, because of how they spend their time. I told folks, if you all been, I'm looking at the folks and I think all of you or most of you have been in the class, and I think I've mentioned to you all that I did a little bit of independent study and probability when I was younger. Basically spent some time in casinos. That was my study. It was very expensive education, by the way. I don't recommend it. I noticed something though. When I was spent some more than an inordinate amount of time in casinos, I noticed that when people won a big jackpot, that the very first thing that they always said is thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and it caused this little thing in my head to say, gosh, there's some kind of relationship here between happiness and gratitude. It's an odd way to find it, to be honest with you, but I found it nonetheless. And the more I read about it, the more I began to understand that one of the biggest keys to happiness is gratitude. This gets back to a man is not wealthy for how much he has, but how little he needs. The ability to be grateful for what we have and not continually strive for more is the key to happiness. So if you can start every day, instead of thinking about what we don't have, but thinking about what we do have, and we have a lot, right? We can just rattle them off. For those of you, most of you are in the San Francisco Bay Area, you live in one of the best areas in the entire world. Being born in America is an advantage that a lot of folks don't have. Going to college, going to school, having libraries, having the internet, having broadband, having food 3 times a day. These are luxuries for people in some parts of the world. So let's not look up to the people who have this inordinate need to have so much when so many people have so little. Why do we lionize the people with this? We should pity these people. What the heck do you need $100 billion for? I pity you. I don't look up to you. You have something in your ego that tells you you must have an inordinate amount of money in order to be happy, while so many people are starving. I pity you. Be grateful and be thankful for what you have, and you will find happiness. I believe this to be true. This is something that both my wife and I hammer into the boys all the time. Being kind doesn't cost anything extra. When in doubt, just be kind. You know, you read, spend time on social media and read things, and people put these platitudes and things, and sometimes they're almost trite. I don't want to be trite, but everybody is fighting their own fight, and we know nothing about it. Even in our spouses, even in our kids, we're all fighting this fight here in our heads. And it doesn't cost us anything to be kind to people, to realize that other people have these problems, and just every once in a while, just be kind. That's it. If you're, when we get the luxury to eat out again, I know some people are eating out. We went, John and I walked down Burlingame Avenue, and you'd think that some people wouldn't realize there's a pandemic going on. But when we eat out and they mess up your order, right? Why yell at somebody? Just say, hey, mistakes happen, right? Mistakes happen. Be nice. It's just so easy. It's easy. It doesn't cost anything. There's these apocryphal stories about executives taking people, prospective candidates out to lunch to see how they treat the waiting staff. How you treat people who cannot do anything for you is a good measure of a person. Do you treat people who serve you with contempt, or do you treat them as human beings and treat them nicely? Obviously, we should treat them nicely, because we're all human beings. There's no difference. Some of us had bigger breaks. Some of us had better luck. It doesn't cost anything to be kind. This is another one. This is one I tell my teams more so than my kids, but I tell my teams all the time. I said, you're not going to get paid anything anymore for having a bad time. Might as well have fun at work. We spend more time at work than we spend with people we love. We spend more time at work than anything. You might as well have fun. I mean, they're not going to pay you anymore for having a bad time. I used to say, look, if they paid more money for having a bad time, I'd be having the worst time of anyone. I'd be walking around with a frown on my face and cussing all the time. If they paid me more money, probably would. At least some of us would. You might as well have fun. That's a choice. I mean, a lot of what I'm talking about is there's, especially kids and immature adults, they think that life happens to them. They don't realize that they have a choice. We have a choice, and we should choose to have a good time and have fun at work. It's contagious. I know that if you walk down the street and smile, other people smile. It's part of being human. We have that social connection. And that's it. Those are some things that I talk to my kids about when I get the time to talk to them. And I thought that you might find that somewhat interesting.